You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. Listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. Glad to welcome to the program Slava Rabinovich, direct from Moscow via Skype. Slava has joined us on several occasions, is really a regular contributor to this program, and I think a huge reason that we are able to keep our audience as well informed as we are. Slava, welcome back.
Thank you, Yuri.
Well, it looks like the relationship between Russia and the United States has gained some paramount importance. And how does it seem from Moscow, where you are, the sanctions? It looks like there is some talk of maybe even removing sanctions. Where do you think this could be all headed?
It's becoming really hilarious. It's like a comedy club. It seems like Trump won the presidency not of the United States, but that of Russia. Everybody in Russia were waiting for that telephone call with an anticipation that sanctions will be removed and that Putin will score yet another huge political victory. Like in a kindergarten, I would hate to say, with mentally retarded children. It's really amazing how the population at large deteriorated in its ability to think anything.
And how are people are handling, obviously, the turnaround of the United States becoming a friend from the Russian point of view is kind of cognitive dissonance, because Russians have been told that America is such a danger and such a threat and the perennial enemy. How is this being perceived? Is this difficult to convince people that America now may be our friend?
It's yet to be seen, but Yuri, don't hold your breath. It always happens with a new administration. Half a year, give or take, is honeymoon, and after 6 months plus or minus, it becomes clear that America does not allow Russia to invade other countries, to steal money in Russia and export this stolen money and launder it in the West. America does not allow Russia without consequences to annex territories of its neighbors. It does not allow Russia to kill people for political reasons in its jails. So in about 6 months, Trump would be yet another enemy number one, as Obama became one, and many more of those were of the same kind of category in the past.
So are there consequences? Are there really, because I think sanctions are supposed to be about consequences, but if sanctions are just viewed as a bad thing in and of itself, and then we get rid of the bad thing, then in a way we're admitting that it's okay to annex other territories. Isn't that true?
There are huge consequences. It is a matter of understanding and presenting the facts objectively, not the way these facts are presented on the Russian state propaganda television. There are sanctions that are personal, so-called personal sanctions against specific people, and these are the most irritating sanctions to the Putin's regime. In fact, they began much earlier than Russian aggression against Ukraine. They began with the murder of Sergei Magnitsky in the Russian jail, and with the so-called Magnitsky Act and the accompanying list, Magnitsky list, on which some of the Russian officials made their way into that list. And the personal sanctions continued on after Russia invaded Ukraine and after it shot down the Malaysian Boeing MH17. There are other types of sanctions which are economic, financial, political, and military. And these caused an enormous financial burden. They cause general increase, multiple increase in the weighted average cost of capital for all Russian companies, not only state-owned companies, but also for private companies. The difference between the normal, quote-unquote normal weighted average cost of capital and the same with the sanctions, this difference is huge, and it's costing Russian companies and Russian GDP billions and billions of dollars.
Not to mention that, as you described earlier, it makes the whole market toxic.
That's correct. Regardless of the fact that this or that company is under sanctions or not under sanctions, the entire Russian marketplace became toxic because of this sanctions regime, and also Russia is falling behind in its modernization drive. Sanctions are supposed to deprive Russian state companies from Western technologies necessary to explore for oil and extract oil in difficult and remote places such as Arctic. Same goes about shale gas and oil. Also, there is a ban on Western technologies for the Russian military industry, and the latest sanctions of President Obama in his last days in office was the putting a stop to any types of communications between the American security services such as CIA and FBI and others with the Russian security services such as FSB and so on. So I believe that it will cause and already caused a huge impact on the Russian security services. And all of that taken together is obviously not a good thing for Putin's regime. It also causes some disarray and probably at this point a secret, if not mild, revolt within the Russian elite. But
the elite is so completely installed by Putin himself, it hardly seems logical to really expect those. They are just so much weaker. They really have no ability to form anything. They're all afraid that I think that the other one will turn them in. I mean, it's just power games, but they're not very strong.
That's correct, but that's why I have always been saying for the last 2.5 years that the so-called personal sanctions, which were instituted in the first place and then widened, these had to be really done really at a much larger scale. They should have been against, let's say, 200 people to begin with increasing that number by 100 people per month. And once the total number of sanctioned people reached 3,000 or 5,000 people, we would have seen a different picture within the so-called Russian elite in terms of their desire to get rid of Putin.
Sure, but here's what I think American listeners are not really understand the connection, but there is a retaliatory measures that are taken by Russian government against the Western sanctions, and they are, interestingly and I think confusingly, are not really directed against the West, because there's really little that Russia can do to influence that market, but they're directed against Russia's native population. And that's really bizarre and has really dramatically drastic negative consequences, such as what was passed, and Slava, I was hoping you could say a couple of words about this, the retaliatory act for Magnitsky that attacked all the orphans from being adopted in the United States, from Russian orphans being adopted by American families, which really just punished Russian children, or the food ban that is only punishing Russian consumers. What kind of logic is this, Slava?
Well, this is the logic of bandits who took over power in Russia in a very illegal and criminal manner. And there is even an internet meme here that in order to retaliate against Western sanctions or U.S. sanctions, Putin will bomb Voronezh, which is a city southeast of Moscow. So Putin doesn't care about his own people, his compatriots, the citizens of Russia, Russian children, Russian orphans. He doesn't give a damn. He is pursuing this kind of a Africa dictator type of tactic. Remember, in some of the African countries, when Western leaders wanted to put a stop to some kind of a genocide or stop some awful things that were done by some of these African dictators, they were saying, we have 8 teachers here from Europe. We'll murder them because we believe that they teach our children bad things. We will murder them in retaliation, or something like that. So it's the same kind of things. The Western people and Western governments have a vague understanding whom they're dealing with.
You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. My guest today is Slava Rabinovich. Slava is a very well-known blogger in Russia, but due to his background, we're able to communicate smoothly in English as ever to bring you this, I think, important and definitely relevant conversation about news affairs of this world, but with a distinctly Russian perspective, as Slava is joining me on via Skype from Moscow. Slava, I think one of the similarities that there are between the United States and Russia these days is that both are governed by people who are, first of all, somewhat unpredictable, and really is another way of expressing this unpredictability. Putin has been described as not a strategist, but a tactician. And really, Trump is, if anything, is definitely a tactician as well, because he moves so quickly and rapidly, and really doesn't seem to maybe even have a big plan altogether. So, what are your thoughts about the similarities and where could this lead?
Well, the place of Mr. Trump in American history is yet to be determined, of course, and his presidency, however lengthy it may end up, it's too early to tell. But what can be said now is the vast difference between American institutions and Russian institutions in terms of the division of powers and democracy. For example, Trump issues this decree banning the entry to certain types of immigrants who already have been granted visas, and there are some of them who already arrived in ports of entry and denied entry at the border, and all of a sudden we find out that the really one of the most important branches of power, the court system, the judicial system, is questioning the legality of this decree. And so some of the American people, whether one can agree or disagree with their views, they assemble and they go to JFK Airport and they wage a relatively large rally there and then demonstration against these presidential decrees. And then the judicial power is investigating and exploring the legality of his decrees. Let's turn the table around and imagine this ever happening in Putin's Russia. The airport or international airport, let's say Sheremetyevo or some other airport in Russia of that size, there's a so-called режимный объект, a kind of a special place where is guarded and no rallies and no demonstrations would ever be permitted. They're not even permitted in the streets of Russian cities. Not talking about kind of a rally at their airport. And I don't have to tell you or your listeners anything about the Russian judicial system by now, I think. So American democracy and institutions, they will find ways to put Trump in quite a narrow corridor where he will be running, and the corridor will be becoming narrower and narrower if and when he becomes more volatile. So
you're convinced that the system will tame him, and there is no taming of Mr. Putin because he runs the system from beginning to end, and the whole system's out of control anyway.
The American system will tame Trump to the extent that he may be impeached in the most extreme scenario. I mean,
but
why?
Isn't it interesting that right here we're trying to figure out, almost, I think, especially progressives, is why has not impeachment begun? It's pretty obvious that they're bad things that Mr. Trump is being accused of doing, and the effects are very severe. He clearly seems like he's doing something that doesn't know much about, and also, but yet no impeachment. And I think that maybe the reason is that we just don't have people on the other side, so to say, the Republicans, who are turning on Trump. And if you have Republican leadership turn on Trump, the base will eat them alive. So they have these, and there's no such problems, of course, in Russia.
Well, remember, President Clinton was not going to be impeached for having oral sex with Ms. Lewinsky. The problem was not in Ms. Lewinsky and the relationship with her, but rather in President Clinton lying under oath. And you can't really go and impeach Trump for this or that, which may not be criminal or anything of that sort within his presidential powers, but the probabilities of this process taking place in some kind of a future, this probabilities increase with the various investigations, congressional hearings, Senate hearings regarding all of these questions that have been surrounding not only him, not only Trump, but also his people on his election campaign, including their ties to the Russian government. And the more they are called onto questioning, the more they swear on a Bible to say truth, nothing but truth, the more there's a probability that they will start lying. And once they start lying under oath, that's the easiest way for a huge scandal or a series of scandals which may lead to these processes taking place, including a potential impeachment. But so far, I don't think that one can lay out cards on the table and say that Trump has done illegal things or something which are counter to the U.S. interests and get him impeached. It would have been too simple and too. The American system doesn't work that way. It's not. It's designed.
Do you feel
you can't really launch an impeachment of any president? It has to be an issue, a very serious issue, and those political enemies of Trump, they probably are looking for these serious issues, and they are getting themselves prepared.
In that case, Slava, would you say that you would consider Trump to be a criminal, even though he hasn't been convicted? The reason I'm asking you this is because we have mentioned, I know on an occasion in the past where we had a conversation whether Putin is to be considered a criminal, even though he hasn't been found to be criminal legal in a court system, and how is that important and relevant? But maybe that I don't know. That's a big discussion.
Well, you're raising a good point, and this is a complex issue. But I cannot consider Trump a criminal. There is nothing that is of my knowledge where I could have classify as a criminal act or acting in bad faith against U.S. interests or violating the U.S. Constitution or violating the presidential oath that he took on the 20th of January. That there is no explicit or implicit violation at this point based on what I know. It might be uncovered and it might be judged to be in the process which is well defined in the U.S. The process is called impeachment, but in Putin's case is completely different. Putin's actions, at least since the 24th of September 2011, are all criminal. He is banned from serving a third term. 2 consecutive terms as president is the constitutional maximum for any president in Russia.
But didn't he change the law?
No, he didn't. He didn't change the law. The Supreme Court in Russia ruled back in 1998 during Yeltsin's years that the president cannot serve a third term, that 2 consecutive terms are constitutional maximum. And when Putin announced on the 24th of September of 2011 that he is going to run for his next term, a third term, when he was prime minister in this revolving door circus with Medvedev, that's when the whole violation of the Russian Constitution was made not implicit but explicit, and in fact that's exactly what triggered a huge fall off in the capital investment in Russia. If you look at it from the economics standpoint and financial standpoint, you will see a huge dip in investment in all of the sectors of the Russian economy, in all the industries, in all companies. It fell like a rock in 2012. Why? Because compared to 2011, it became clear that Putin is coming back, and if he decided to violate the constitution in the most grave manner, then the whole system, the whole rule of law is under question, and very much so. And once you don't have a rule of law and protection of property rights, there is no reason to invest anything into Russia. That's how investors voted with their feet. So once that happened, he took on a path of unconstitutional actions that continued up to this day. And obviously, annexation of Crimea and the war against Ukraine and invasion of Ukraine from the east, all of this is a violation of international law. It's also a violation of the Russian Constitution, of which Putin is the so-called guarantor. So, nothing can be said about Trump of this sort of or anything like that. But in Putin's case, it's obvious. You don't have to be a lawyer or a constitutional lawyer or a criminal lawyer, international lawyer. You just need to have a bit of a brain and the ability to connect two dots. That's all.
Slava Rabinovich, in conclusion, I'd like to ask you really just your thoughts on, there was a phone call finally that took place between President Trump and President Putin, and we don't really know what was discussed, but what do you think was likely to have been discussed? What do you think they should have discussed? Your thoughts?
Well, I think that, first of all, Trump had to acquaint himself and to learn as a leader of the free world to communicate with other world leaders, be they legal or illegal in the case of Putin. And it is very important to note that a telephone call with Putin took place after the first foreign visit of any foreign leader into the United States after Trump took office. This was Theresa May, the Prime Minister of the UK, and the political course that US takes or UK takes in 99.9% of all cases is not even similar, it's identical. These are historic allies, and the policy of the United Kingdom in regards to Russia and Russian aggression is very clear. And so it was very symbolic for Trump to host UK Prime Minister generally, but in particular, it shows that the US and the UK are allies and allies on the Eastern Front as well. In addition to that, you may note that the telephone call with Putin took place after Mr. Trump spoke with Angela Merkel Chancellor of Germany. And this was also very telling. They also spoke 45 minutes, the same kind of a length of the conversation that the following conversation with Putin took place. What did Trump discuss with Merkel before speaking with Putin? I'm sure that he asked Ms. Merkel to give him a rundown of the entire relationship between Merkel and Putin, dating back to the early days of this relationship, following through with the so-called the Munich speech that Putin gave in Munich in 2007, where he first, for the first time in his political career, he started talking about the time to end a single polar world and domination of the United States, and the special place that Russia was to take in the world affairs, and all this BS of that sort, which he repeatedly said once again on several occasions, and notably in October of 2014 in Valdai in Russia, after annexing Crimea, after invading Ukraine, after shooting down Malaysian Boeing flight MH17, and probably rounding off with the latest Merkel's impressions of Putin from the meetings in Minsk, from G20, from this kind of impression that I'm sure Merkel presented in quite an objective manner. And you and I and your listeners know very well what kind of impression Merkel has of Putin. And so they spoke for 45 minutes before this telephone call with Putin took place.
But I think at the same time, Ms. Merkel has to understand, she has her opinion of Mr. Trump as well already. It's not like he's a blank slate coming into this. He's got, she has to be, she has a view on his relationship with Russia as well.
True, but, Trump is not a complete idiot. I mean, he would take as many.
There are different opinions on this.
I mean, he was collecting opinions on Putin, and wouldn't hurt. But frankly, I have no idea what Trump and Putin spoke about during a 45-minute call. In terms of, the official line is they haven't spoken about sanctions. Would I believe this official line? In fact, I probably would.
Really? You don't find that just reversing it completely would make more sense? That they did discuss sanctions, because what else is there to discuss?
Oh, there is a lot of things to discuss.
And
for example,
yeah, go ahead.
For example, sending Russian soldiers onto on a ground operation in Syria to fight ISIS or something like that, in exchange for some favors, in exchange for some, cookies, or lifting some sort of sanctions. Russia has so many types of sanctions imposed on it that lifting some of that long list in exchange for a land operation of Russian military, it might be not a bad deal for the United States. The only thing that I don't think that Russia has this capability. I don't think it does. The entire the whole invasion of Ukraine fell through, and the occupation of the eastern part of Ukraine didn't take place because, in fact, Russia does not have 50,000 troops that, first of all, Russia does not have 50,000 troops of this kind of training that can go into a foreign land and occupy. I don't think it has. And the second point is that even if it had, politically, for Putin, it's impossible to have 50,000 troops put on the ground in a foreign land to occupy and then have 10 or 20,000 coffins coming back to Russia in a very fast order. I think it will be this will be a political suicide for Putin, even with the current non-active, to say the least, state of the Russian population in terms of political activity. So I don't think that Putin has any kind of troops to put on the ground in Syria either. I don't think that Putin has anything to offer to the United States, in fact.
I don't think, and here's where I guess, okay, let's take this one more step. Why would Mr. Trump care about what would be good for the United States? I think he has shown a pretty consistent, just a selfish kind of angle to this whole thing. One point of view. And personal enrichment seems to be something that he seems to be valuing very, very highly, as well as promoting his own brand. So there has been talk about some part of the Russian oil company Rosneft being handed over or promised to Trump. And I'm not saying that particular deal is true or any other particular deal is true, but the idea that Russians could take some of that oil money and just buy up just Trump, period. Personally, why else do they? And the theory that I heard that made the most sense recently, and your thoughts, is that this would be some kind of a fake nuclear disarmament deal where Russians can say that they will do disarmament, and everybody in the West will supposedly like the sound of that, and that would be a good reason to remove the sanctions. So could there be some kind of a fake-up reason when the real reasons are, just personal benefit for leader of the free world?
Well, I don't believe in conspiracy theories that Trump is controlled by the Kremlin and he is only looking for personal enrichment while being controlled by the Kremlin. But some elements of these could be a risk factor in a non-conspiratorial context. But the problem here is that even if there were some selfish or self-enrichment wishes or plans of Trump and some people around him, such as the U.S. Head of the State Department and the former head of one of the largest oil companies and the
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.
Exactly, and the person who received state honor medal from Putin. It may well be that they had some plans, at least on a commercial side of the relationship. But the problem is that they screwed up the entire, if not conspiracy, then the whole plan by associating themselves with the Kremlin or allowing the Kremlin to be associated with it throughout all this hacking scandals and other accusations. So there is nothing that they can do without being examined by the by the journalists, by political forces.
So that's again the test of the institutions.
Well, these are not really institutions. It's basically they cornered themselves And once they are in the corner, this is a very specific corner. It's all under microscope. It's not just a simple corner. It's like a corner under huge, microscope and telescope and what have you. And the whole thing is caused by all of this prelude, all of this that happened many months prior to his inauguration. So all of that, I think, blew up. I don't think it's even possible. And in regards to this 19.5% of Rosneft's fake privatization, even if this stake was designed undercover somehow to end up under somebody's very hidden beneficial control, then it's in the same league. It's in the same corner under the microscope. I don't think that there are any shares of any company that are watched for so carefully now as this 19.5% stake in Rosneft's versus Trump or anybody close to Trump. So it's not even possible. So this strategy blew up, if there was any.
Slava Rabinovich, news analyst, joining Rashkin Report via Skype from Moscow, Russia. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you, Yuri, for inviting.
You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report.